A quick warning, this episode contains conversations about a miscarriage and addiction. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank God I didn't touch fentanyl. Messed up over almost a year and a half. It's you, but it's also the disease of addiction talking to you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today I'm here with Piper from episode 1 called One of the Lucky Ones, our most listened to episode, actually. And during our episode with her, we talked about her story while she was in active addiction and how she ended up in rehab in LA. And you had been sober then for probably a year, almost a year and a half. So now we're in January 23. And I think Piper has some updates for us.
Yeah, so I relapsed. My drug of choice prior was fentanyl. That was like the main drug that I wanted to do. That was my drug of choice. But this relapse, thank God, I didn't touch fentanyl. I didn't have any triggers or anything to touch fentanyl, but I was smoking weed and I was drinking and I did mushrooms. And I feel like a lot of it came because I had so much unhealed trauma that happened in my first year of sobriety that I just didn't deal with. And it's crazy because when we recorded, I was in such a good spot in my recovery. And then just stopping a few things, not going to meetings, weekly, multiple times a week, not doing my step work, not having a relationship with my sponsor. All of these things contributed to why I relapsed.
And then I guess when we released in September, you had relapsed.
Yes, I had relapsed and I was listening to it and I was like, dang. I was like, dang. But at that time, what comes with relapse, especially at the beginning, for me, at least, I don't want to speak for other people, but for me, you have a lot of feelings of shame and guilt and just dang, I was just sitting there dang, I just messed up over almost a year and a half,
Right.
But what's cool about that is that you don't lose, just because you relapse doesn't mean you lose any of the knowledge that you gained for the clean time that you had. I have built such an amazing community of people around me that, when I did relapse and I did get honest again, they just opened up their arms and was like, come here, we'll carry you through this hard time. This is why it's so important not to isolate, because when I was in active addiction, that's all I wanted to do was isolate because I didn't want people to know what was truly going on with me.
For yourself, you're like, I've made so much progress. There's guilt and shame with telling people. Do you think that was a part of it?
Yeah, definitely. It took me a while to get honest, and there was some pretty hard events throughout my relapse that happened that made me get honest. And I'm grateful that I got honest when I did. And even though those things were horrible to go through, I am grateful that they happened. It's all about those thoughts that you have that you need to speak on. My first whole year plus of recovery, and I didn't speak on that. I always thought oh, maybe I can smoke weed one day. So I always had in the back of my mind, I didn't really have a problem with weed. I only really had a problem with fentanyl and other hard drugs, but weed, when I was doing fentanyl, weed was never really an issue. But what I found is that regardless what drug I'm doing, I'm going to abuse it. Just because I was just smoking weed doesn't mean that I was spending all of my money on it, just like I was doing fentanyl. My biggest character defect is pushing things down and sweeping things under the rug. My first year of my of recovery, I had a miscarriage and it was super traumatic. I ended up in the emergency room. I had to have emergency surgery. It was super traumatic. And at that point, I only had, I want to say 5 or 6 months clean. And so I never really dealt with that. I just stuffed it and didn't really deal with that, put it in a tiny box, locked it, and put it to the side. And so, if you don't deal with these super life-changing events, then it's going to come back up in another way.
Mm-hmm.
but my relapse just happened like so fast, like it was like I had some thoughts like a week prior, like maybe I can smoke weed, kind of stuffing down those previous thoughts I had. And when they came back up, I was laying in bed one night about to go to sleep with my boyfriend. And, I was like, I've been thinking about smoking weed. And he was like, you know what? So have I. The first hit of that weed, it's like my stomach just dropped. And we were in the car at a 7-Eleven in the parking lot. And my boyfriend, he looked at me and he was like, I can feel the guilt in my stomach.
As long as you know, like, I can't do that. It doesn't work for me. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that at least you know that now, right? Rather than later, or it stopped when it did. Because it sounds like at some point, either way, you were going to smoke.
Yeah. And, I was going down the road to fentanyl because, when I first relapsed and I was smoking weed, I set all these boundaries for myself. I drew a line in the sand, okay, I'm going to smoke weed, but I'm not going to drink. I'm going to smoke weed, but I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to smoke weed and I can control it and I can handle it, And then I smoked weed. And then, one night it sounded nice, why don't I have a glass of wine? Why not just have a glass of wine, relax? Like, I've already relapsed, So I had a glass of wine. And then I was on like a website because in California they have all these like websites where you can just get weed and other stuff delivered to you. So I was on this website and they were selling mushrooms. That sounds kind of nice, to kind of trip out a little bit, get out of myself. And so I did mushrooms and I crossed these boundaries that I set for myself. I talked to my sponsor about it when I first got clean again in September. And I was like, look, everyone keeps telling me that I was eventually going to do fentanyl again, but I don't understand why they keep saying that because I didn't want to do it. I didn't have any triggers to do it. I didn't have any interest in doing that. But what I just explained to you is what she explained to me. You crossed all these boundaries for yourself, and it may have taken a week, a month, a year, 2 years, so on, but it would have happened. You crossed these boundaries for yourself. So who's to say that you wouldn't have crossed that boundary?
Right.
That's why I want to talk about it because it's you, but it's also the disease of addiction talking to you and telling you like you don't need people, you can isolate yourself, you don't need friends, you don't need to go to meetings, like you're good, like you've gone to enough meetings, and that's the disease of addiction trying to separate you from your community and from your recovery. And that's why it's so important, to go to meetings and to talk about this stuff because it reminds you of like why you're here. And even just sitting here talking with you about this, it's like reminding me of all this stuff again. Like, okay, yeah, like that didn't work for me. And I'm happy that I'm talking about it because it makes me realize that I can't do that. And yeah, I'm an addict. Like, I love drugs, but I can't do that because they will ruin my life.
It's a good fucking thing that you know that. You're lucky nothing you took killed you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I feel so grateful because I was on the way to doing fentanyl and I just lost one of my really good friends, Kalisha Thomas, to the disease of addiction. She overdosed on fentanyl. I have lost a lot of people in recovery due to fentanyl, and it's hard. That's one of the hardest things about recovery is that you create these relationships with people and not everyone makes it. Like, I thought it was so beautiful you guys like labeled the title of my last podcast was one of the lucky ones because I do feel so grateful. Like, living in gratitude is one of the most important things, like you need to be grateful like throughout your day, saying those little like thank you God, even for the little things. Oh, you catch a green light, thank you God, because a grateful addict won't relapse. And if you're having thoughts, talk about it, like my DMs are always open, to anyone who's struggling or having thoughts or sober curious or whatever it is, and it's so important to talk about it because it takes the power out of it. Things are normally a lot worse in our minds than what they really are. And just because you're thinking about it doesn't mean you have to do it. I didn't have to do that, but I did it because I didn't rely on the tools in my toolbox to fix the problem. Meetings, your sponsor, community, friendships, step work, your higher power, all these things that are in your toolbox. And if you don't use your tools to fix whatever needs to be fixed, then it's not going to get fixed.
Right.
It's just going to be broken.
I'm grateful that you've been given tools to use, but I'm even more grateful that you use those tools. So glad you're taking advantage of it. I mean, that's why you got there, to get sober.
If you go to meetings, work on your step work, have a relationship with your higher power, have a sponsor. I think that's what's really different for me this time around is I have a new sponsor, and I can literally, first of all, she's someone who I want to be. She has a strong recovery, and even though she has almost 6 years clean, she still goes to meetings like 3, 4 times a week. That's why we say one day at a time. If I sit back and I'm like, oh my God, I have to be sober for the rest of my life, like, how am I going to do this? Like, take it one day at a time. I remember when I was just getting off fentanyl, my first time around in recovery. I couldn't even think about, I would wake up in the morning and I couldn't even think about just my day, what I needed to do that day. It seemed so overwhelming without drugs. You just have to break it down and really think, if you do all these little things right, the big things will just fall into place. All of these things need to coexist and work together to have a successful recovery. But also, I can go to a meeting and I can share and I can talk about it. People will just come up to you after the meeting and be like, you know what, that same shit happened to me, and this is how I got through it. All these things that you can do that take so much power out of the shit that bothers us. It's just not a good life for me, because I'm an addict and it doesn't matter what substance I use, it's going to control me. And I'm going to cross those lines in the sand that I drew. And it took me probably about a month and a half to like get through those feelings and like work through them and realize like, okay, I'm grateful that this happened. I realize why this happened now. And now I can get clean again, but look at it from a different perspective. And I can take a different approach, and I can see all the things I did wrong last time. And I can also see all the things I did right.
Right.
And I can see, where I went wrong, what were my warning signs, what happened, and not self-destruct. Oh, I said I didn't want to do this again, and here I am doing it again, and like, but to sit there and have to sit through those withdrawals for 5 days, it really made me realize like, it's like the consequences of your own actions, like that was, I mean, that wasn't my only consequence, but that was a consequence of my actions, like I don't want to feel like that again. I don't want to put myself through that pain again. So I do have those thoughts where, why can't I be a normie? Like you're a normie, Carmen. Like you can drink or whatever. Not that you do a lot, but you can do that, and it's not going to ruin your life. If you have a strong recovery, those thoughts won't overpower. They won't overpower everything else.
And no, I love you just as you are. I love you as Piper, whether you're using or not. Like you're supposed to be that.
Yeah.
For more conversations like these or to find a support system near you, go to generationsos.org.